Hello, and welcome to MRA's 5-Minute HR Feed, the podcast where we share quick and practical information. In the time it takes you to go grab a cup of coffee, you'll gain insights into hot topics and pressing HR issues. I'm your host, Nicole Morehouse, and we're glad you're listening. Before we start, here's our usual disclaimer that the information being shared is not and should not be considered legal advice. Now let's dive into our topic.
Today, we're diving into an increasingly important topic: the legal risks employers can face when well-intentioned policies and procedures end up favoring or appear to favor certain classes of employees. We'll explore where diversity and inclusion initiatives can cross legal lines under Title VII and other anti-discrimination laws. And we'll discuss how organizations can still champion diversity and inclusion without inadvertently engaging in unlawful practices. Let's start off by briefly discussing Title VII. Title VII protects employees and applicants from discrimination based on things like race, sex, national origin, religion, and other protected characteristics. Crucially, this protection applies equally to all of us, all workers, meaning well-intended actions favoring one group can still constitute discrimination. So even when an employer's motive is good and it's for diversity and inclusion, actions that an employer uses that consider race, sex, or other protected characteristics, even if they're one of several factors, might violate federal law. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Department of Justice have recently reaffirmed that intentions don't override the law. No matter what the employer's motive is, there is no good discrimination. So let's dive into some examples of common diversity and inclusion efforts that might unintentionally cross legal boundaries. First, let's look at workforce balancing initiatives. So any attempts to balance your workforce by preferring a certain demographic or group, demographic of individuals, such as aiming for specific gender composition, racial composition, etc. Those can be unlawful under the law. Using protected characteristics in your decision-making, selecting candidates, for example, in hiring or for promotion, providing training or special programs because of a characteristic like race, sex, or other, even again, in part, that might give you potential liability or exposure under Title VII. If you separate or classify employees, separation, some organizations, for example, have employee resource groups or developmental tracks that are exclusive to certain people. Exclusive programs can be seen as separation if they are limited and the access is closed and there's not equal opportunity for others. Again, separating training or development. So offering training and development programs for only women, for example, or other identity restricted programs, even if they have equivalent content accessible maybe under another program, because there is that exclusive and restricted content that's available, that could be viewed as unlawful as well. If you're using any sort of criteria or quotas in your interviewing or hiring metrics, so mandating that certain demographics must be included or preferred during hiring or promotion processes, that's going to be specifically called out by the EEOC and the DOJ as potentially discriminatory. If you offer compensation and or any other form of benefits, let's say paid time off, if you award an individual with compensation or benefits for participating in selective behavior that violates Title VII, that will also probably be heavily scrutinized. If you make assumptions of unconscious or implicit bias, so using an employee's characteristic to assume that they have unconscious or implicit bias may be viewed as a form of discrimination as well. So the key here is disparate treatment. When individuals are treated differently because of protected characteristics, even if well-intentioned policies and procedures consider race or sex, etc., if they disadvantage people outside of those groups, then enforcement agencies and some courts may classify that as unlawful discrimination when it occurs. Essentially, there's no business necessity exception under Title VII for discriminatory diversity and inclusion practices. Even if an employer can argue legitimately that diversity is a business goal, Title VII does not permit race or sex or characteristic-based decision-making to achieve it. Don't lose faith. Employers can still promote diversity and inclusion in the workplace without treating employees differently and without violating Title VII and other anti-discrimination laws. Here are some ways to do that. Focus on equal employment opportunity for everyone. Ensure that your policies, practices, and workplace opportunities are open to all employees on equal terms. Focus on removing barriers instead of creating preferences. Make sure you're conducting audits to make sure that you are looking at potential barriers, making sure you don't have any sort of biased practices, don't have any barriers in terms of accessibility, and that you don't have any disproportionate outcomes because of processes, procedures, or barriers that you might have in place. Be neutral. Ensure that your recruitment outreach is reaching a broad audience. Use neutral scoring methods for candidate selection. Standardize your promotion criteria and train managers on neutral policies and procedures and inclusive leadership. Offer additional inclusive development opportunities. So instead of exclusive programs, offer open programs, things like leadership programs, mentorship programs, without forming automatic exclusions of other individuals. Foster voluntary, perhaps employee-led resource groups. As I mentioned before, ERGs or employee resource groups, if they're exclusive in nature, that may be problematic. They're likely fine when participation is open to everyone and when the organization avoids restricting entry based on a characteristic. At the heart of this compliance, articulating it is relatively simple. Obviously, changing course, changing culture, those things are not simple. At the heart of the compliance component of this, essentially policies must never advantage or disadvantage employees because of a protected trait. Good intentions cannot cure discriminatory effects. Employers, though, as I've mentioned, can still meaningfully advance their diversity and inclusion goals. This is done through equal opportunity, barrier removal, inclusive culture building, and fair processes. All of this without engaging in practices that risk violating Title VII and other anti-discrimination laws. With that, I want to thank you for joining today's episode. If you're an HR professional navigating the evolving diversity and inclusion landscape, remember, compliance does not have to conflict with inclusion. You can pursue both. Join us next time for more insights on all things HR.
Thank you for listening to MRA's 5-Minute HR Feed. Be sure to follow and connect with us for more podcasts and updates. If you're a member and have questions, you can always connect with MRA's 24/7 HR hotline by emailing info.now@mranet.org or by calling 866-474-6854.